With Obi-Wan Kenobi being released to massive critical and fan acclaim, it's interesting to take a look back on all the hype for the series before it was released. Hardcore fans of the show will likely remember when it was first teased with behind-the-scenes footage on Disney Plus Day in 2021. Back then, the hype for Obi-Wan among Star Wars fans was unparalleled, and it certainly didn't disappoint when it was released. Today, we're going to be taking a look at all the details fans pulled out of this early footage and concept art. Go on a trip down memory lane with us as we look at the 6 things fans couldn't wait to see in Obi-Wan. First up is the initial glimpse of Darth Vader meditating in his fortress. Aside from Kenobi himself, there was a certain character who fans were incredibly excited to see make a glorious return. One of the most anticipated elements of Obi-Wan before its release was the return of Darth Vader to our screens. Being one of the most iconic villains in cinema history, it's understandable why. Before fans got to see Vader in action once again in Obi-Wan, all they had to go off of was some concept art showing the villain in his fortress. While fans were already somewhat aware that Vader would be appearing in the series, nothing compared to seeing the first shot of the villain in the show. The still featured Darth Vader in his fortress sitting ominously on his throne. Fans were left wondering what Darth Vader's arc would be in the show and whether he would be the main antagonist or be featured as more of a side character. With the villain's last appearance in the universe taking place in 2016's Rogue One, that film featured Vader as little more than a cameo. The promise of a more in-depth return of the villain is something that had fans salivating long before Obi-Wan was ever released. As we'll get into later in the video, there is a specific moment featuring Vader that fans were expecting to see in the show above all else. Next up are the Inquisitors hunting after Obi-Wan. Another piece of concept art had fans looking forward to the appearance of a specific villain, albeit one that was slightly less famous than Darth Vader. This shot features stormtroopers disembarking an Imperial ship, being led by a mysterious masked figure in black. Fans of the Clone Wars animated series were quick to point out that this was none other than an Inquisitor. This made fans of that series even more excited for Obi-Wan than they already likely were. Inquisitors were a common foe for Obi-Wan in the animated series, but the prospect of seeing Obi-Wan confront these enemies in live action was truly exciting. Fans began to speculate that this specific Inquisitor might have been the second sister who appeared in the video game Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. This was quickly put to rest, however, by fans realizing that Vader would have already killed this character by the time of the Obi-Wan series. In many ways, fans of the Clone Wars were likely the most excited for Obi-Wan, as it is something of a spiritual successor to that show. The Inquisitors are just further proof of this. Coming up next is the excitement for Obi-Wan being on the run from the show's villains. With what fans already knew about the plot of the series, the prospect of the Inquisitors made them even more intrigued about how things would play out. As hardcore fans of the series already knew, Obi-Wan would be exiled and on the run for much of the show. Fans were quick to point out that any single Inquisitor would be no match for Obi-Wan, but the added pressure of being in hiding would make them a rather challenging foe to face. This led fans to anticipate the show having a more suspenseful atmosphere that would make it closer to a thriller than a standard Star Wars project. This theory was backed up by Cal Kestis in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order being discovered because of his use of Force. Fans would theorize that Obi-Wan similarly may not be able to use his powers for fear of being found out because Kenobi is one of, if not the, strongest living Jedi, and keeping his identity hidden would be crucial. Fans were truly excited about how Obi-Wan would deal with the pressures of concealing his identity. It was cool to see fans speculating about the plot of the show before its release, especially when, in hindsight, they were pretty spot on about what would be going down. Up next is how excited fans were about a showdown between Obi and Vader himself. If the shot of Vader in his fortress wasn't enough to get fans excited for the show, the prospect of Obi-Wan and Vader facing off for the first time was enough to send them into a near frenzy. This was heavily teased by showrunners, and understandably so. A rematch between Obi-Wan and his former student is something every Star Wars fan was wanting to see for a long time, especially with Anakin now being the more powerful version of himself. There was concept art revealed that showed the two clashing lightsabers against a flaming backdrop. McGregor himself would even tease this to fans, saying that his character and the former Anakin might, quote, get another swing at each other. Fans were skeptical at first, considering that this battle would technically go against what's already been established in the original trilogy. A New Hope implies that the last time the two faced off against each other was in Revenge of the Sith. With that being said, this minor inconsistency was not enough to keep fans from getting excited about the potential battle. With Darth Darth Vader being more powerful than their last showdown, the battle promised to be even more equal than their last. This potential battle was one of the main selling points for the show before its release, and for good reason. Coming next up is the first look at the Jedi Temple occupied by Imperial forces. Next up, one of the most interesting set pieces that was revealed as concept art was the Jedi Palace filled with stormtroopers. This got fans excited thinking about all the other locations the show would eventually explore. The initial concept art showed the eerie image of the Grand Hall filled with stormtroopers and promised to be a very interesting set piece for the show. Fans were excited to see the Jedi Palace, now ruled by Emperor Palpatine, be depicted in live action for the first time. Fans of Star Wars novels and comic books certainly felt like they were getting a treat, as the Imperial-ruled Jedi Palace is a location frequently used in those stories. What was so cool about Obi-Wan before it came out is that fans of all different obscure Star Wars stories, whether they be video games, shows, or books, were all speculating whether some of their favorite locations and characters would make appearances in the show. As we now know, the final product likely didn't disappoint any of these hardcore fans. It's exciting to think about what other Star Wars projects will be announced over the coming years, and what obscure details from the depths of Star Wars mythology will be brought to light as a result. If Obi-Wan is any indication, if you're a diehard Star Wars fan, you'll likely be in for a real treat. Finally, was all the hype for Deborah Chow as director? The final thing Star Wars fans were getting hyped about Obi-Wan wasn't any specific character or set piece. Instead, it would be their excitement for the director of the show, Deborah Chow. Long before its release, fans already knew that Obi-Wan would be a 6-episode limited series, so their expectations were high for each episode. They were relieved to hear the news that Deborah Chow would be the director for all 6 of the episodes. This was because Chow has already had previous experience in the Star Wars universe, specifically with the fan-favorite series The Mandalorian. Fans were fondly remembering Chow's work on the show, praising her directing efforts in episode 3 and 7 of the show. As fans were quick to point out, these were some of the most emotional and action-packed episodes of the whole series, so they were excited to see what she would bring to an entire series of her own. Especially after hearing Chow talk about her vision for the show before its release, fans couldn't wait to see what she would bring to the table. With the show's high success upon its release, fans were right to trust that Chow would deliver. With how well she did on both The Mandalorian and Obi-Wan, fans likely wouldn't be opposed to Chow being at the helm of many more Star Wars projects in the future. Were you one of the many fans who couldn't wait to see the Obi-Wan series? Now that it's out, did it end up living up to all the hype, or do you think it fell short? What was your favorite moment on the show? Was there anything you were expecting for the show that didn't happen? Are there any other Star Wars characters who you think deserve a show of their own? Please let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, we'll see you next time.